how do we assess students when the pandemic unleveled the playing ground for these kids? And that was predominantly evident in Malaysia. When things moved online, lessons became even more teacher-centered. Questions posed by teachers were answered by the teachers. There was limited student participation and engagement was difficult to ascertain. Let's not even talk about giving feedback to students in order to improve. Students became faceless boxes on the screen, and this became quite unnerving for the teacher who did her part by talking content. In essence, teaching was happening, but learning, probably not. I believe a lot of other countries also face similar challenges with us here in Malaysia. Similar challenges to us here in Malaysia, right? So we had to rethink assessment, how to assess students remotely, right? When most teachers did not have the required tech skills while their students did, and most students face connectivity and tech issues. This is very much with what Ms. Beverly said earlier, right? Two profile of students, urban students, very connected, but then teachers were not equipped with the skills or did not have the necessary skills. And then we had a lot of rural students who had connectivity issues, tech issues, could not even assess the online part of teaching and learning. So rethinking assessment involved a mindset change, right? The teachers, policymakers needed to understand that assessment is no longer just about the grades, but it's inherently about the child's learning, right? Is the child acquiring any new knowledge during these times? How much is the child learning? What can the child do with this learning while being stuck at home, right? So basically, what we can do to assess, right, when learning is taking place at home, right? So in order to rethink assessment, we first needed to rethink the way we teach. Okay, so what we did here in Malaysia for teachers, we sought expertise from each other because this was the quickest fix. When the pandemic came in here, I think Malaysia went into a lockdown in March 2019. It hit everybody with a wave. We were in a limbo for a moment on what do we do with students, they were at home, how do we assess, and all these questions, right? So essentially teachers had no time to attend trainings, webinars. They had to learn fast and they had to learn now. So most of these teachers, or most of our teachers, they learned the basics first from their own colleagues who were more tech savvy, and then eventually mastered other tech tools to be used in their online lessons, right? So these are tools that we'll be visiting later on, tools that they use to assess their students. So eventually we had all our teachers rethinking about assessment as they were using the following tools to assess their students. So our teachers used word wall, quizzes, live worksheets, Kahoot. A lot of what I'm saying right now is very familiar with a lot of you, right? So they had to rethink assignments and assessment. They moved away from grading mentality to let's assess if the child is actually learning and to what extent, right? So they used WhatsApp, ClassPoint, Knowledge, digital whiteboard, peer deck, and these are just a few things. The second thing that we did was international collaboration via the 𝗙𝗵𝒄 Global Learning Network. So we set up a network because we wanted, the initial thinking behind it was, we wanted to gather all our teachers in Malaysia and all our students in Malaysia who are facing the same challenges during this pandemic and get them to leverage off each other and learn. But what happened essentially is that broadened the horizons for us and we stepped out of Malaysia and now we're global. And currently the network has 100 schools and counting from all around the world, from Europe, from Africa, from Malaysia, Philippines. So we got teachers from other countries to share their best practices to our teachers. So just to name one from the top of my head, we had this teacher from Philippines. Her name was Celine, and she did a very short 1-hour session with our teachers here in Perlis, a state up north in Malaysia, on the tech tools that they could use to assess. And then, of course, the last one was on-the-job training, right? So a lot of our teachers had to go through rigorous on-the-job training. They had to learn, unlearn, relearn as things were happening. So these are some of the tools that our teachers use to assess students. And remember, not grading, right? We wanted to know whether the child was learning. That was our focus, right? So these were students who had connectivity, had a device. Every home had like 3-4 devices, so siblings could use their own devices, parents could still work from home, etc. Now, how about the kids who did not have connectivity or did not have devices, right? So we had to think about those kids because, truth be told, 60 to 70% of our demographics in Malaysia consists of these children, right? So eventually we had to think of an alternative, and this is what we did for students with limited connectivity. 𝗙𝗚𝗏𝗏 came up with the idea, Bright Ideas, and basically what Bright Ideas is, it was a response to the current needs of Malaysian teachers and students who were affected by the current pandemic, especially those who did not have connectivity or had no access to devices, right? So these resources are based on the home-based learning guide developed by the Ministry of Education here in our country that explains the various approaches, online and offline and off-site as well, and methods. So a lot of it was down to project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, modules like Beverly mentioned, right? And these help teachers plan and implement home-based learning, right? So we aligned, 𝗙𝗏𝗏 aligned the approaches and methods to other remote learning modalities with hands-on tasks for teachers to use with links to various types of assessment. So we had to think of the assessing part as well, because of course parents are going to come and ask us, so how do I know my child is progressing or not, right? So that is ultimately the question. So they had to rethink all of that. So Bright Ideas was simply easy ideas, solutions for teachers, and we had it for not just teachers, but for school leaders, media leaders, parents. So my next slide, I'll show you specifically what it is. The second thing that we did was PDPR Live. PDPR essentially means home-based teaching and learning. PDPR is the Bahasa Malaysia version of home-based teaching and learning. So again, a set of resources developed by 𝗙𝗏𝗏 aligned to the approaches and methods to other remote learning modalities. Now, how did we go about sharing these things with parents? So in a landscape study that we did, we realized that one thing everybody had at home was a mobile device, right? Everyone, bare minimum, had one mobile device at home. So the best way to share these resources was we created screenshots or snapshots of it, and we started SMSing parents and teachers through Telegram, WhatsApp, and even using just telco service providers, right? And this is how we got them to rethink assessment and to share this with their kids and their students to ensure teaching and learning was still going on. So this is Bright Ideas. As you can see, the tabs up there. There are various categories. There are things for parents that they can download for free and do, school leaders, right? Teachers. So this bridged the gap between parents complaining that they had no time to support their children at home. So mind you, parents were also working from home, right? And a lot of us are still in Malaysia working from home. We've not been full force back to the office. And of course, then, we had teachers complaining that parents were not supporting their kids, so the teachers had to carry that burden of proof that, everything was on the teachers. So this helped bridge that gap, right? And this is the PDPR Live resource that I was talking about earlier. So this is something that 𝗙𝗏𝗏 came up with, right? And it's linked to subject and the academic year, aligned to different types of assessment. As you can see, there is one chunk at the bottom there that says classroom-based assessment. It tells you how to implement, and it gives a tip for teachers. What can teachers do with this particular task or worksheet, and what parents can do with this particular task and worksheet. Right? So these were kids who were technologically challenged, and we had to think of options for them. So how we did it? Basically through all of this. What you see on the screen right now, that's exactly what we did, right? We had free webinar series, we had communities of practice, we had on-the-ground support, we had our 𝗙𝗏𝗏 colleagues in schools, supporting the teachers. And then we had some teachers who were printing worksheets, leaving it in pigeonholes, getting parents to come and take it, and then return it after they're done with it, So these were some of the things we did. But essentially, like Dr. Carmela mentioned, it's the collaboration, right? Working across all walks of life, breaking all those boundaries, learning from other countries, and then of course, trying, failing, and trying again, right? It's a non-stop cycle. So this is what we did. And our biggest takeaway from this was to change is to essentially grow through all the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity while riding on technology.